Hot97.com. What's going on, y'all? It's Jameer. Hanging out here. Thought I'd have a conversation with some of my favorite people. I want to open up the airwaves and the television waves to the cast of the Grapevine. Yes. All right. So Aisha.
Hello.
Yes. Latasha. Donovan, who is the producer, and our wonderful creator, Ashley Acuna. Give it up to y'all.
Hey, what's up?
That's right. But I felt like it was necessary to have this conversation. I happen to be a panelist. Thank you, by the way, on the Grapevine. We all caught some it was a viral moment.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, about Bruno Mars and cultural appropriation. It was featured on Newsday. It was featured Newsweek. Featured on CNN, Vibe, Complex, Washington Post. I mean, so the cultural appropriation conversation went viral, but I feel like it was very skewed. So
Definitely.
So I wanted to have this conversation with you guys because I think it's important to get the real message out there. All right, so let me start. Because a lot of people on Twitter and Instagram were saying, hey, Bruno Mars is a national treasure. Why do we start with him for cultural appropriation? Why was it important for Bruno Mars to be a part of this conversation?
It was just honestly timing because he had just won Album of the Year at the Grammys, and I think that the conversation of whether or not he's an appropriator was reignited on social media, and we ended up shooting our episode like weeks later, but we still wanted to shoot it. So it was a timing thing. We talked about Iggy Azalea before. We've mentioned like the Kim Kardashians and the Justin Timberlakes. Go to the Grapevine on YouTube and you can see those conversations. Yeah. But it was purely timing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the timing did have played a major part, as well as some comments that our good friend Seren made on the Grapevine that actually took the clip viral.
Yes.
And even though she's not with us right here, she did send a clip in about appropriation versus appreciation.
I think that the main difference between appropriation and appreciation of a culture is the power dynamics that are at play and also the amount of privilege. When they're doing something specifically that the subjugated culture does and they're elevated above that culture for the specific reason that they are not a part of it, that is when we start getting to appropriation territory. And that's something that we do see happening with Bruno Mars. Bruno Mars, as a non-Black person of color, is able to adopt a lot of, again, the cultural cues and signifiers and stereotypical and traditional, historical, Black music and Black art forms and be elevated above Black artists, even though he's not making creative, unique, original content. But people love to say, like, oh, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I feel like who made that up? Bruno appreciates our culture, but he expresses his appreciation by dressing up like us and performing like us, not doing something unique and original. And if I go in your house and I appreciate your couch, so I walk off with it, I steal it, and then I say, oh yeah, I loved your couch, I appreciated it, so I took it, so it's fine. I still stole it.
What's your take on it?
Well, I think that it's important that we have this conversation, and I think that it being centered around Bruno Mars is the genius part about it, because we know that Justin Timberlake is an obvious appropriator, as well as Miley Cyrus and a couple of these other examples, Bieber, et cetera, et cetera. I think that the best thing about the conversation was that we got to kind of like concentrate it around people of color doing the appropriating. And I thought it was just so interesting when we talk about appreciation versus appropriation, because all of a sudden, because he's a person of color, it's appreciation. And I'm like, okay, cool. So now he's a quarter Puerto Rican, which makes him Black. All of a sudden it's hot to be Black because of the conversation, but I don't necessarily, or at least I haven't been privy to the conversations of Puerto Ricans declaring their Blackness.
Not at all.
You know what I'm saying? So I feel like for that, we need to take a closer look. And I think upon examination, we really get to see that my biggest thing is that yes, he's amazing. He's like, yo, shout out to this person, that person, for creating this type of music that I'm now able to do. But it's like, but you're still being dragged to court by people who are like the Marvin Gaye estate, or even Zapp and Roger.
Zapp and Roger.
That says something. They're literally saying you stole my music. So for me, that reconciliation is hard for me. Like, can I say that he's an appropriator? I would say to a certain extent, I think that he is, but that's like on a very, 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 very specific level if you have that information. I think like a lot of people are just like, oh, whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's just we have to pay closer attention to it.
How did you feel about this topic needing to be had?
When we taped, I still am a Bruno Mars fan.
I'm a Bruno Mars fan.
I'm definitely a Bruno Mars fan.
Yeah.
But when we taped, I was speaking on a micro level of, I do see the appreciation. I see him going on the award shows and saying these black artists by name. And there was a story going around about how he wanted to curate a show for the Super Bowl with these black artists who would never, without his help, get the chance to be on that stage. So to me, he was doing his part. And I was looking at Bruno Mars and just being a fan, and I felt like we can see how much of his own talent that he's putting into this music, that Bruno is really singing these notes, really did his homework, really did the history, and he's doing these dances, and he's really putting himself, unlike Justin Timberlake or a Miley, who are Timbaland made Justin Timberlake. We like Miley because of Mike Will made it. Like, they're not bringing any of their own creations to the stage. But hearing people like Seren and hearing that he's like copy and paste, originally I wanted to like just fight for him and be like, no, but he actually works so hard and he does this stuff. But stepping back and looking at Bruno, it was like, okay, let me go back to 90s R&B. We had SWV with the nails. We had Escape, who brought out baggy clothes on women. We had TLC with the silk pajamas. We had Run DMC with the Kangos and the leather and the Adidas. And like, when it comes to black artists, they make a staple and they create change and they start a culture in their own ways due to their artistry. Now, when I hear the conversation and I step back and look at Bruno again, did Bruno invent something new? Everybody was right. I don't think he did invent anything new. And so then we have to ask the question like, okay, if he's copying, the only reason why I like his leather suit is because I've seen it already. The only reason why I like his Adidas is because I've seen it already. The only reason why I like his hair because I've seen it already. What did Bruno do, besides that amazing voice, but what did he do to say, that's Bruno in this black sound, and that's where we're losing it?
A lot of people in the comments on social media were like, Bruno pays his dues. Bruno is out here advocating for people like Teddy Riley and Jammin' Lewis and all these prolific people in the funk and New Jack Swing era. Why is he getting caught up in the cultural appropriation kind of win?
Well, you know, first of all, I think there's value in discussion. I think one of the reasons why we're having such a deep and broad and international at this point discussion is because the line is so blurred. It's very easy with the Miley Cyrus. It's very easy to say that's clearly a cultural appropriation. Iggy Azalea. With Bruno Mars, the line is a lot more blurred, so we have to have a far more nuanced discussion. So I think there's a value in that. And I've been thinking a lot about this as a hobbyist, as a dancer.
Yes.
And you guys all know I grew up in ballet, and I was, the only, to this day, there are not a lot of black women in ballet, and that's kind of seen as like European culture. Now I do salsa, again, not a lot of black women, and what I realize is that a lot of other cultures sort of hold their cultural identity and their cultural production very close to their chest. So even though there are other people who participate, you're a visitor in their culture. And when it comes to culture that's produced from the African American experience, it's up for grabs. So when we look at hip hop, when we look at jazz, and we look at R&B, when we look at funk at this point, you can see anybody of any complexion, of any ethnicity, of any place on the continent, in the world, really, participating in everything really besides gospel, and that's just because the church is still this very segregated place. So the question is, why is it that everyone else is allowed to participate and profit off of our culture, but we're not entitled to that same invitation? And I think for people who watch the entire video,
That's
they
just a
can see
2-minute
where we
clip.
were yes, they can see where we were going with that.
Yeah.
I thought something opened my eyes when I was on the panel about intent and intentions. I think Jeff, shout out to Jeff, who's major key drop.
Bringing light skin back. Come
Bringing
on,
light
Jeff.
skin back.
What up, Jeff?
Shout out to Jeff.
Hey, Jeff.
But he was talking about the specific intentions. Now we've seen people like Miley Cyrus directly take and then dip. We've seen people like Justin Timberlake take and then dip from the culture. We haven't really seen that with Bruno. So my thing is, are we being too hard on Bruno, or are we being right and being defensive?
I don't think we're being too hard on Bruno. I think a lot of times, like Latasha said, it's hard to see your fave be criticized. I talked about this in an article. Like, I went crazy when a man was trying to slander Beyonce in college, and I kicked him out of my apartment. You know what I mean? We defend our faves out of defensiveness, but it's good. Like, nobody's above critique, and I think that, again, if you watch the whole episode, you see there are people who are on Bruno's side who don't think he's a cultural appropriator. I can't even say for 100% fact that I think he's a cultural appropriator, but I do think there's an overarching theme, like Seren mentioned, of the general public not wanting to see Black music from Black bodies, and it's that anti-Blackness that's still very prevalent in this country and globally.
This is the industry that gave us Pink, who said, L.A. Reid told me I could be a rock star if I pretended to do this thing. You know what I'm saying? And for a lot of us, we were I know I was confused. Me and my friends, we were confused as to hell. Where did she come from? Who is she? Where is she from? She must be Italian or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, just trying to figure out what she is. Yeah. And so, and that's only one of several examples. There are tons of examples. Adele, like I think I may have mentioned it, and Seren backed me up by saying that the quote from Adele was like, "What does Beyonce have to do to win the this Grammy for Album of the Year?" There are countless of examples of Black people being erased. You know what I'm saying? Even when it comes to movies, certain people who are like maybe dark Latin people who identify as Latin, they're casted as Black people before actual people who fit the phenotype of an African or an African American. Right. You know what I'm saying? So historically, we know for a fact that Black people have been subjugated to erasure over and over and over again. So I think that intent is fantastic, but what are the realities of a Bruno Mars? Like, what happens when a Bruno Mars rises to the top? And who else is left? You know what I'm saying? And there's the one other thing is this idea that he can now take his Blackness off, right? Because people are handing it to him. He's a quarter Puerto Rican, which means that he's Black now, so it's his too. Okay, fine. We give him a badge to get through to the barbecue, just like we did for Miley and everybody else. The only thing we have on our side is time. We wait until he messes up.
I got you. No, I heard you.
And
thank you for that.
And that's if he messes up, because we don't know. But I think it would be silly for us to just be like giving out passes everywhere and not being critical even of people of color who profit off of Black things. Once again, that Black people ourselves cannot benefit from.
Right.
And really quickly, I want to stay on this Grammy thread. There is a huge difference in the way that Bruno was received when people discovered he was Black. When he decided to be Black, he gets to swarm the Grammys and take home one of the top Grammys at the end of the night, the Album of the Year, which is one of the biggest Grammys you can get, and he gets rewarded for discovering his Blackness. When Beyonce took a stand and said, I am Black, here's Lemonade and here's Formation, and white people were like, well, what the fuck is that?
I'm very uncomfortable.
She doesn't belong to us right now?
I think a lot of responsibility has been on us having the discussion. But what can he do, and people like him who come into predominantly Black spaces and create this art so they won't be considered on that end? Or is there anything that they can do?
No, I don't think the onus is on Bruno, because I don't think this is about Bruno. Bruno opens the floodgates for us to have this discussion as to why is it that Black people, African American people cannot profit off of their culture in the same way. There's something that happens in companies when a company will take over, and so they'll keep some of the old employees around just long enough to train the new employees, and when the new employees got it, then they get rid of the old employees, and that pretty much happens with like African American cultural production. Like, once we discover that somebody else can do it and it sound about right, then they become superstars and everybody else becomes, has-beens. And so at the end of the day, the onus is not on Bruno Mars. It's about the system that allows for a Bruno Mars to experience superstardom when those those that he's based his music upon have not. So the question is, what can the music industry do? The question is, and I think that's what's so uncomfortable is the truth really hurts. And I think there are people who are acting like they don't understand what Seren was saying. People want to dismiss it, and they want to dismiss it because they understand perfectly what she was saying and the fact that we are all participating in this culture, this society of appropriation and exploitation of Black labor and Black production.
First of all, I agree with everything you said. And once again, we love Bruno Mars. Not all of us feel the exact same way that Seren does while we understand her points. It's like we do appreciate him. Now, what I think that he can do, I know that he's super talented, right? Like, I know that he's Filipino. I know all of these things about him, but I want to know more about how he leverages his fame to help people that he's benefiting from. I want to know more about what are some initiatives that he's coming with and that he's working with and partnering with to help Black people in upward mobility, whether that be within music or whether that be in the social and social reform and justice reform spaces. Like, Colin Kaepernick gave his career away for this thing, no longer being able to benefit of what he brought to the organization that we call the NFL. I want to see, like, what can Bruno do? What kind of, like, reform can he bring? And say, like, I'm doing this off of the backs of these people, and this is how I can continue to lift you guys forward. Because I know he's made certain comments. I know he talked about Mr. Castile and his death, saying that this is not right. But I want to see more visibility, the same type of visibility I see you coming through in the Living Color set. I want to see you rolling through when shit happens and we need to hear from you. I want to hear from you when things happen, and I want to hear from you.
I think he definitely needs to speak up.
That's a really good point.
A big part of this is the conversation. You know, I invite Bruno to come on the show. Fine. But I'm just saying, in general, I think that it's important that we have these kinds of conversations, not run away and hide from them, not release very short anecdotal statements, which can then be, you know, conflated with other things, and it gets kind of muddy. It's like, where are you on these issues? In the same way that we know who you are, allegedly, with the music. So I want to see more of that, more accountability in that way, because people were coming after the Grapevine for this and letting Bruno just skate right through. Once again, the onus is on Black people to resolve our own issues. I want to hear him talk about this.
Gotcha.
And I also, can I just add one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
I also, I feel that there needs to be, like, when Azalea Banks was at Hot 97 and she was crying about how, like, they're taking away hip hop, it's like, I felt her so much, and I feel like there has to be, like, a level of empathy for Black people, because we are the cool, we create the cool, and a lot of times, like we see in the music industry now, we don't benefit from that. And I think there needs to be a level of empathy for Black people, and not a rush to condemnation when we do say, like, listen, this is our stuff, this is all we have, literally, and it's being taken away from, like, our hands. So yeah.
Guys, thank you guys for this amazing conversation. Guys, this was amazing. Ashley, where can they find the Grapevine and watch full videos?
Full hour-long video.
Part 1 and part 2.
Give social media.
You can watch us on at YouTube, The Grapevine TV. Just type that in. Will be the first things that come up. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Grapevine TV every Thursday at 9 a.m.